All right, everyone, welcome back. We're going to move into another workflow demo. This one's a little bit more of a creative workflow, and we're focusing on 3D visual effects. I've asked Bill Innes to join us here. He's going to be running Flame today. Also got Will Harris, who's moved over to Flare. I'm going to show you Flare. Flare is a great new product from Autodesk, an extension of that Flame creative tool set. And we've got Roland down on the end. Roland's going to run Maya for us. We're going to show you how not just our interactive 2D, 3D compositing systems work together, but also how we tie into that entire creative pipeline for 3D. So we'll bring some Maya elements in and show you how all that works together. So let's jump in and talk a little bit about what we mean by 3D visual effects. It's really an important concept. I mean, today every commercial production in some way probably involves some level of CG. Films use a lot of CG. And Flame is really the heart of an interactive CG compositing environment. It's a great box for doing everything from the basic conform through the visual effects to finishing. And really creating that parallel workflow is a great way to do this. You're creating an environment that your artists can work together. They can share information, they can share metadata, and they can be more efficient. So it's really important along the way. So really watch how Flame is sort of that key tool that bridges that gap between 2D and 3D. So, Bill, let's actually go ahead and move right into our project. This is a great customer example that I really like. It's a perfect example of how this workflow comes together. So tell us a little bit about the spot and the mill in LA who put it together.
Yeah, so it was done by one of our best customers, the mill, and the LA office did this spot. It was basically for a video game, and the idea or the concept behind it was, let's take some of the game footage and incorporate that into some background plates that were shot, practical. So
very typical. You're taking essentially some kind of elements, in this case the video game footage, you're putting it into some practical production elements. One of the things that's interesting, and we'll talk about this when we look at it, is some of these shots they went out and did the way they wanted them to look, but other times they had to even use stock footage, in which case they were creating entire environments, almost entire environments in CG.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that was an interesting challenge for them was the way that they revealed the game footage and incorporated that into these background plates. So we'll take a look at that as well.
Okay, so let's take a look at the final, then we'll come back and look at how the mill put this together. So it's really a great spot, and the video game footage is kind of the star of the entire production. So one of the big challenges was to figure out how to incorporate all that into it. So this is a before and after reel, and it not only shows how some of the shots were put together, but it also shows some of the process the artists at the mill went through to figure out how to really incorporate this footage.
Yeah, they really wanted to go for a graffiti kind of look on the walls of these buildings and such. So they thought that would be a nice look, and then once they treated the footage, it was all about tracking it into the back plates, incorporating it, in this case, using different ways of revealing it. We've got some practical shots of some ink reveals. They also used 3D techniques and a lot of 2D techniques in Flame.
Yeah, what you're going to see is as Bill works through this spot, he's going to show you why artists love working on Flame. It's fast, it's interactive, you can really design and experiment around with things. So that's really the creative side of it. We'll also go through some of the more technical side, getting shots put together, working from that conformed timeline, things like that. So let's move on into Flame. And Bill, you're going to we're going to start finishing at the beginning of that process, which means you've basically got the entire spot conformed in. So you've taken the practical production shots and you've brought them in the form of a multi-layer timeline.
That's right. So we're looking at the original conform here. Again, the concept behind the spot was to actually, as soon as the actor started to draw onto the wall, that's when the effect would begin. So let's look at how that sequence would go. You can see we've got our actor drawing on the wall. He steps back, and of course, we don't see any of the game footage right now. We just see the original background plates, the way that they were finally edited together. Now, there's a lot of challenges here. You notice the tracking marks are on the truck and also on the monitors here. The point of that is to actually replace those areas, of course, with our game footage.
Now, this shot's a particular challenge because that last in shot, really the hero shot of the entire piece, that's actually stock footage.
That's right. It's shot from a helicopter. And as we saw in the final piece, there were actual projections of the game footage on the walls of these various buildings. So there's a lot of work that obviously needs to get done in this spot. And Flame, typically, the Flame artist in the facility is sort of the VFX supervisor. He's usually the one that's bidding the job, the one who's sort of evaluating the best way to tackle these jobs.
May have been on set, doing on-set supervision, things like that.
Also going on set, supervising green screen shoots, things like that. So what generally happens in the facility, and at the mill I know they work this way, basically the Flame artist will kind of drive the overall job. So he'll be able to basically distribute the work across the facility, identifying certain scenes that maybe are going to be done completely in 3D, or maybe 3D elements will be created and then incorporated back here in the Flame side.
Yeah.
The other thing that we wanted to talk about was the specific shots that we want to start generating assets for. So
yeah, typically when you bid this job out, we'll talk a little bit about the process of bidding a job and how you think about that and factor that sort of budget analysis into it. But there's probably 3 or 4 shots. Now, for our example, we're going to pick 2 shots, I think, and what we're going to do is get Roland working on the CG side to start putting that together.
Yeah, and the important thing here that I just want to mention is that we're going to use something called the film box or FBX format to distribute the assets back and forth. So it's a bi-directional process. I'll be able to actually take information that I gather from this end shot. Generally, I'll be calculating the original camera and then sending that camera over to Maya, and Roland will be able to place objects in front of that camera. And also, I'll be able to import from Maya basically a 3D model representation of this wall shot to do some projections here in Flame.
Yeah, you'll see a complete circle in this workflow. So let's actually start at the end, right?
Yeah, we'll go with the end shot. So we've got the stock footage here. We're going to load that up into Action. I'm just going to go ahead and throw away the image itself and go to the 3D tracker. Now
let's talk about what's required on a shot like this. And this is a lot of things that may come in when you think about bidding or winning a job. You know, your client may come to you and say, I want to completely replace every single thing in this shot. I want to put some footage on the walls. I want to build CG buildings. You know, can you do that? And this is a great example of where you could actually sit with your client interactively in Flame and sort of mock this up.
Exactly. So we could even sort of pre-visualize what we're going to do in this particular scene and then send, again, the camera information off to Maya. And when that scene returns, we know we're going to have an exact match between our cameras. Just the automatic and background 3D tracking process has occurred, and it's really, really fast. You can see it I did it in front of you. If I turn the background plate off temporarily, you'll see that our whole scene has sort of been recreated in 3D. You see all the individual points that represent in 3D space the original buildings and the street that we see in our background plate. Now, the orientation to the camera is slightly off for this scene. You can see that the analysis from the helicopter angle is a bit off. The orientation can be adjusted back here on the 3D tracking side by defining a plane. I can go in and just simply make some slight adjustments to the grid here. I'm just moving the angle at which we're going to kind of see down on this scene from our newly created camera. So
you're essentially creating a ground plate for that, right?
Yeah,
so
I'm basically defining what the ground would be, exactly. So we'll just sort of slide that into place here. And again, we can kind of do that to our liking, something like that. And then once we've oriented the camera that we want, we just turn off the define, turn off the grid, and now you'll see that that angle has been adjusted so that now the camera will be pointing down on the scene correctly. Now, to show you how that works, let's go to a 2-up view, and I'll just zoom up on the left, and you see now we've got our newly created camera looking down on the original camera, and of course it's up very high in the sky at the angle that the helicopter would have been at.
Now this is great because at this point you can start kind of figuring out what data you want to pass around. You've really got 2 tasks with this. One of the things you want to do is identify points in that scene and maybe put some locators and things like that for your Maya artist, because later you're going to be sending that off to Maya. But you also might have a client or a producer in the room saying, how are we going to make this shot work?
That's right. So here I'm basically going to drop an object into the scene to kind of represent and, again, pre-visualize how this is all going to work. So we've just dropped a box, just a primitive that we bring in with the whole software ships with different models, in this case a 3D Studio Max model. And I can go ahead and add lights into the scene. You can see I can just position a light anywhere that I want in this scene. And I can also go to the model and start making some adjustments to it. So I'm just going to start to change the scaling a bit, to sort of create my own building. Also kind of blow that up. And directly on screen, I can just start to position that where I want in my scene. So I'm just going to kind of get that slid into place there. And now you can see, because of the newly calculated camera, it's just going to sit in that back plate properly.
Yeah, so this is great. And of course, that's not what our final building is going to look like. This is just pre-visualization. What's great about Flame, and if you think about it, when you go to a CG program, that's not really built around speed, right?
That's right.
Flame really is built for speed. So you can quickly incorporate things like this moving video clip right in with it. So you're dropping models, you're dropping video in, so that you can really figure out how to make this scene work.
That's right. So now I'm going to start to put the game footage in and get an idea of how that's going to work. And at first I'm putting it in just randomly. I just dropped it right in the middle of our scene, and it's just an image plane right now. But let's say I need to get really specific and say I actually want this to be somewhere in the scene and kind of anchored into this environment. I can do things like pick points of the 3D track analysis, and I can create axes. The neat thing here is these axes will now act as locators in my scene. So I could say, let's go to this axis. I could even give it a name, which will become relevant inside of Maya for my Maya artist to know that this is the street level in the scene. So let's go ahead and drop that in on that axis. If I attach the image data, or that plane now, to that location, let's move our light back so we can see it a bit better. I'll just sort of scale that down a little bit, maybe move it up. Here you can see now we can very specifically put things in our scene and tell our Maya artist this is where the building should be, this is where the lamp post should be, and all that kind of information can be distributed off to my Maya artist. But in this case, I'm not going to use an image plane. I'm going to use something called a texture projection. And you can see the icon for that actually looks a little bit like a film projector or a slide projector. What I'm going to do is attach that now to the location that I identified earlier, and then I'll just position that over here. Again, we can rotate that into place, maybe move it up in the scene, change the field of view, change the aspect ratio a bit, change the blending mode, and get this to look kind of integrated into our scene. So here's our sort of starting point, or a pre-visualized look that we're going to go for.
So this might serve two purposes. You might have used this in the bidding process. Maybe you went through it, sat with your producer, you said, no problem, we can do this. It's going to take a couple hours to put this footage on when we do the final spot, but really quickly, in about 5 minutes, you can mock up this shot and see how it looks. Now, you've also gathered some data about the scene in the form of that 3D track.
That's right.
Put some identifying marks in there. So at the same time that you're maybe using this as sort of a previs tool, you can then export that information to Maya. So when you're working with Roland, instead of just telling him, hey, I want to put buildings in this scene, you can literally give him that actual data to start working
I can send him the point cloud. I can send him the axes, the locators with their names, and I can also, of course, send the camera right over to Roland working in Maya.
Now we brought Maya up, so you see Maya is there big on the screen. Bill's still working up there in Flame. And Roland, tell us what you got from Flame, and why is this important as an animator to get this information from the online room?
So once I've loaded that scene from the FBX file, I get such a point cloud here, and you can already identify the scene roughly, the sides of the buildings here. These locators are simply points in my scene, and you can see even better when I bring in the backplate and scrub back and forth a little bit. So you see that all these locators are sitting on the buildings here. And of course I need first these locators that identify the points in the scenery, and also I need the camera that is extracted from this 2D imagery to be able to place something in the scene. I mean, I can of course import buildings here and place them somewhere, but it would be impossible to put them on the footage and make them look as if they were filmed with a real camera without that tracked camera. So this tracking information is very important. In the past, it was so that we were using motion control cameras and extracting data from those. But in this case, it's footage where you don't have any information about the camera position and the camera motion. So this is a good start for me to begin building these, or begin reconstructing that scenery here.
Great. So Roland's representing our CG department. So what we've done is basically given them two assignments. You're also going to work on that hallway shot for us. All right, great. So let's go back to Flame. So you've got your work cut out for you. You've got to start rendering and creating buildings and everything else. Now, Bill, you've got another shot that you were going to concentrate on. And this one, now that you've kind of prevised that in shot, it's really time to start putting things together here in the timeline.
That's right, and I'm going to use the timeline in Flame because it's a great organizational tool. And I'm going to start to work on this particular scene. Now, this is one of the more straightforward shots. It's basically the taxi driver reacting to the game footage on the walls. So what would make a lot of sense here would be to see some reflection of the game footage in his glasses and on the door, glass of the door here, the window. So what I'm going to do is basically navigate in my timeline and pick up the game footage. And you can see I can just pick it up and drop that above in the timeline, that particular clip of the taxi driver. So if you notice here, if I move the focus up and down, we've just got a vertical composite happening here directly in the timeline.
Well, this is what's great about Flame. There's a lot of different options. You know, I think sometimes people think of compositing as sort of a shot-based approach, which really isn't what the idea behind Flame is. It's that you take the whole project and you can represent that as a timeline and move really from start to finish.
From start to finish, exactly. So here my shot game footage is a little too long, so we have all the basic editing tools. I can simply go in and trim that footage back. I can navigate back to the first frame of that shot, move the focus up once again, because I want to create a composite. I'm going to copy the bottom layer back on top, and now I have basically those three layers ready to be composited. I want to be able to see through from the top layer, through the taxi driver scene, down to the game footage, and have that reflected in the glasses and on the glass of the door here, the window. So what we'll do is start to apply some soft effects directly here in the timeline, and these are great for being able to do the really straightforward things that you do every day, things like repositions. Maybe I need to do an axis effect. I want to go ahead and scale something down, do a picture-in-picture kind of effect, or a color correction, or a title. Those types of things can be done all directly in the timeline.
Things that you do in the timeline, and what you're going to see is Bill's going to be able to take these simple effects and build them into a much more complicated, complex effect.
Exactly, and we can also step into the editor for any of these individual soft effects, and we can take that sort of basic steps a lot further. We can start to create a more 3D type compositing environment. So what I'm going to do is go into the keyer, which is available within the axis, and I'm going to do a garbage mask, because we need to be able to kind of create a mask or an area within that shot on the top layer to see down through into the layer below of the game footage. So I'm just going to start to create a garbage mask. You can see I can lay down as many points as I want, create whatever shape that I want, using a combination of linear points or Bezier handle points. I can quickly go in and just create whatever I need for this particular section that I want to cut out. And now when we look at that in the result view and do it on the outside, you can see now we're seeing down through to that bottom layer in the timeline. Now the only issue here is that it's a moving shot, and our mask is of course static. So I don't want to have to move it very painfully, frame by frame over whatever number of frames, animate the position and everything. So I'm simply going to go into the motion tracking area within the software and just sort of ask the software to do the work for me. I'm going to say, let's put points on the background plate. We'll just put a couple of points down. And we're just going to say, let's go ahead and analyze the movement of that background plate and apply that movement to the garbage mat axis. So you see quickly we're able to gather that data, and now you'll see the mask is going to follow along. So this is the really beauty of doing this kind of work is, this kind of more complex stuff can be handled by the software. The next thing we want to deal with is the guy's glasses, and this is going to be a little bit more difficult because notice he turns his head at the end, so we can't use the same tracking data that we used before. So let's start by adding a garbage mask around his glasses here. We're just going to go ahead and sort of outline that, create the shape that we need on the first frame. Let's go ahead and do that. And again, if we just sort of take the color down, you can see we've got the effect happening, but of course it's again a static mask and the guy's moving around. And again, notice he's moving quite a bit. What's also nice about the garbage mask is you have the ability to select individual points. In this case, I'm selecting quite a few points. I'm going to enter the stabilizer now again, and this time we've assigned a tracker to each one of those mask points. So basically, the rotoscoping process here can be automated. I'm able to actually change the overall scaling and size of these reference boxes for the analysis because these are not traditional tracking points. And I can simply say, analyze that movement now, apply that movement not to the axis but to the individual points, and you can see that it's done that for me really quickly and easily, and we see our result is going to work very nicely. Of course, in the interest of time, I'm just going to jump ahead. This is where we've also put in the glasses for the other side, and we've got this composite happening right here in the timeline. So when I step back out, that result, we've got the ability to see down through those multiple vertical layers, and we've got a composite. But it's not really realistic. It doesn't look right. I mean, it's just a little flat and 2D. But what I have the ability to do when I need to get into more complexity is I can select the individual parts of that vertical relationship in the timeline, and I can move that section or that entire timeline into the more advanced procedural compositing area within the software known as batch. So here we've moved into the batch compositing environment. I've got my timeline, I've got my clips selected, and I have access now to all the creative tools in the software. So everything that you can do in the software now is available here in the timeline. And what's great is I can take those 3 clips, maintaining their vertical relationship in the timeline, that compositing relationship, and I can enter what's called a batch effect.
Okay.
Now the batch effects are really a great way of working. You can see that we're into the area where we have access to all our tools. We have our composite. We can still see that vertical relationship between the layers. But I don't want to have to start from scratch. I don't want to have to start over what I've already been working on. I've started some compositing in the player timeline using the soft effects. Why not just take those and promote them out of the timeline but maintain their original relationship? So we've converted the basic axis effect into a more advanced action composite. You can see now I've got that vertical relationship maintained, and I can continue working here in my batch compositing area.
Yeah, this is a great example of flexibility, and batch really kind of becomes that creative heart of Flame because you essentially have access to every single tool. So whereas Bill can start quickly in the timeline and apply those effects in sort of a linear top-down fashion, here he has complete flexibility. He can break these out, he can reorder the effects, he can do really whatever he wants to do with them.
And here I'm going to start adding some lights. We're going to create a more advanced composite. The great thing here is the lights can be assigned to individual layers, and you can have exclusive lighting. So I'm going to go ahead and make some of the layers exclusive. This way only the lights will affect only the areas of the image that I want. I'll go ahead and pull the first light back so it's kind of hitting the background plate. And the second light, if I turn the shine value on the surface, I'll use this light to start to create the real glass look that we're going for to make this look not so 2D and flat, but take this into a much more realistic sort of relationship with that image. Now, the thing about these images within the compositing environment is they can be blended with different transfer modes. So, for example, I could go into a simple add. Now we can see through to the bottom layer. I can adjust the transparency of that layer, and of course I can start to get a much more realistic glass look on the glasses and also the window here. Can also keyframe an animation. We'll just have the light move across the scene to create a more dramatic look. And now we've integrated in a more realistic way the game footage into that scene. When I return back to the timeline, that segment is now collapsed down into one icon in the timeline. If I need to revise that, I can just double click. I'm right back into the batch effects. And from here, I can simply process that effect down to see that in real time.
So that's a great example of sort of it's the kind of work you have to do every day, right?
Yeah.
Not highly creative, but really just a technical thing. You've got to put a reflection in a scene, you've got to remove a logo, you've got to add a logo